All right, so who would the three crossover games be, for lack of a better term? We don't have the term anymore. Who would Georgia's three permanent so-called rivals be in a nine-game SEC schedule? It's a good question that's going to have to be answered sooner than later. In fact, the SEC may already know the answer to this. My suspicion is they do. Stick with me here on this one. It's going to take a second or two to break down. Georgia and Florida will play against one another no matter what. If for some reason there is a nine-game schedule that goes 8-1, one permanent rival and eight other teams that you rotate through, it would be Georgia and Florida, just like it would be Auburn and Alabama. That's not what's being signaled behind the scenes, okay? So who would be second? Well, we know the answer to that. It'd be Auburn. So Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Auburn. If a game has a nickname, it's sticking around. So um, those two games, Georgia will play them forever. I've talked about that decision Georgia made in 2013 to play Auburn, even though at Auburn, even though they were not scheduled to play Auburn. It was arranged so that the school could play. That was my understanding of it. But Georgia had to go to Auburn twice. That happened, and it kind of goofed up the scheduling for both Auburn and Georgia. But it's really something Auburn's complained about quite a bit. But in a 6-3 format, so my point with all that is that's how important Georgia Auburn is to the Dogs. It's very important to Auburn too. Auburn asked for the game to be moved earlier in the season. Georgia didn't really get in the way. Now it's in October. It's strange that it's in October. I'm not gonna lie. It's going to take me a long time to get used to that. But there were plenty of games with Georgia and Auburn where it was in the 70s. But it is typically a sweater game, and now that it's in late September, early October, that's a little odd. The game that replaced it at the end of the season, Georgia Tennessee, that game is probably going away as an every year game. And the reason why is Georgia can't play everybody, and neither can Tennessee, by the way. I mean, Tennessee cannot play every single team that it traditionally plays. And, it did not traditionally play Georgia. It did not traditionally play the Gators. But over the last, 20 years, 30 years, I guess, since they win the divisions, those three teams have played one another all the time. Tennessee is going to keep Alabama. They're going to keep the Gators, but they're not going to keep Georgia. And they're not going to keep Georgia because, very specifically, of Georgia's situation with Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Auburn. Georgia's not going to play three, quote, traditional powers in the SEC. It will get mixed up. So, with that said, we're no longer going to see this game. Well, it's not that we're not going to see Georgia, Tennessee. We're not going to see it every year, okay? Pick up Double Dogs today. I know a lot of y'all see these videos for the first time. Make sure you're picking it up. We had a lot of orders lately. Order it. The link is down below. It's our look at the 2022 season. Georgia's undefeated 2022 season, 15-0. It's hard to believe they went undefeated, but they did. They certainly did. When you look at everybody else, this is going to come down to four teams. And I think Vanderbilt gets eliminated relatively quickly because of their situation with some other teams. But Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Auburn leads to only one game being left. And the question becomes, will that be Vandy, Kentucky, or South Carolina? Those are the other ones because it's not going to be Tennessee. Obviously, it's not going to be Missouri. So it really comes down to, is it going to be Vandy, Kentucky, Tennessee, or Carolina? We talked about why it won't be Tennessee. My suspicion why it will not be Vanderbilt is that they gotta have Tennessee, okay? So that's a locked in game. I think that would be Tennessee's non-high end tier game. For Vanderbilt, they've got a few traditional rivals people don't talk about. Mississippi has been one they played for a long, long time. They have Alabama too. They played for a long time as well. Now that was an inequitable rivalry, but it did exist, and that Nashville is right there. You also have Vandy, Kentucky, which is a one, but they will not. I mean, I would be very confused if Vandy, Tennessee didn't play every year. They're in-state rivals, so So to me, that leaves Kentucky and South Carolina. And I think for South Carolina, this Kentucky's not going to be the same way about this. South Carolina is really going to want to play Georgia every year, and I can go through that all in a second. For Kentucky, it's a little bit complicated. They are probably going to want to play Vanderbilt and Tennessee every year if they have their way. Um, but they, for a long time now, have played Mississippi State. Will Mississippi State and Kentucky continue? Someone's got to play Missouri, and it ain't gonna be Georgia. Okay, I'm gonna tell you that right now. So Missouri, Georgia is done. Thank God. I wonder if South Carolina is going to get stuck with Missouri. That would be a really rough one for Carolina. They've done it for 10 years. They would continue to do it, but I think they might say, "We'll take." They may say, "We'll take Missouri if you'll give us Georgia." I just don't know if the league will do that. I mean, if Georgia were to play South Carolina, Florida, and Auburn all in the same year, it is totally possible that all three of those teams could be top 20 teams. Is that fair? If, say, Florida's playing, you know, if Florida's got Vanderbilt somehow, I mean, because Florida and Vanderbilt played for a long, long time too. I don't know. My suspicion is that it will be Georgia, Kentucky. And the reason being that those two teams have played longer than Georgia, South Carolina. They played longer than I think anybody besides Georgia, Auburn. Um, and it's a game that people don't view Kentucky in the traditional, SEC world as a top seven team a top eight team in the newly constructed league. Georgia, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas. I mean, obviously those are not going to happen. Texas has their own sort of Georgia problems in this front, but uh, you know, the one other thing to watch here is with the Gators. They have zero interest in playing LSU. LSU is not super like those two teams, those two programs have been trying to get rid of each other for a long time. Um, you know, I think that when Florida had LSU and Auburn, and Georgia had Ole Miss and Auburn, maybe you can make the case. Although at the time, Ole Miss was every bit as good as Auburn in the '90s, which is to say, Ole Miss was every bit as good as LSU in the '90s, which is to say, not great anyway. So this LSU Florida thing is another thing to watch because the Gators are going to get Georgia. The question is, who's the other team they're going to get? And who are the other two teams are going to get? My suspicion is that they're going to keep Tennessee. So it'd be Georgia, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida. I'm sorry, y'all. The Gators and Vols, and the Georgia, Florida is in stone. That is happening. Period. Till the end of time. Okay, that is happening no matter what. The question is, who will the other two be for Florida? Because that's not as obvious, I don't think. I think you got Florida, Tennessee, Florida, LSU. But again, Oklahoma can't play everybody either. Like, there are going to be teams that are going to want to play them. Texas, obviously, that's going to be their 1A and 1B. Texas A&M takes a back seat to Oklahoma for the Horns. I do think Texas will get both of them, but like Texas can't play everybody either. Alabama can't play everybody, and it is totally possible that Alabama could get stuck, and I really mean stuck, with Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee, and that's not really fair, to be honest. So you could see a situation in the future with divisionless SEC, where you have all sorts of just sort of strange things. LSU has Ole Miss, LSU has Alabama, but for Alabama, LSU is really traditionally number three, if that. So in LSU, to me, I would put LSU and Texas together. But again, Texas cannot play everybody. They cannot, they traditionally have played Oklahoma. I mean, they played Oklahoma every year forever. Texas Arkansas is a long-standing rivalry that got cut off in the '90s when Arkansas left, and then obviously A&M. That rivalry with Texas happened until 2012, so 2011, excuse me. So there are some games that are just so important that you can't cut them. Ole Miss LSU, I think that's one of the games you just cannot cut it. Georgia Auburn, obviously. I don't think you really want to cut LSU Auburn, but again, LSU can't play everybody either, and you know LSU does not have a traditional, mano a mano rival in the SEC. They don't. That team does not exist. They cannot be Alabama's number one rival. Alabama has a number one rival. It's Auburn. So, if there were a game that got chopped from Georgia, it would not be Georgia Florida. It would be, Georgia Auburn. That would be there too. So once you're not the one in these rivalries, you stand a chance of losing those games. I understand and fully appreciate, and I'm not making fun of them. South Carolina, I mean, Georgia is their biggest SEC rival. That's what it is. That's number 2 for the Gamecocks. All right, and please don't try to correct me about this stuff below about South Carolina. I understand their situation completely and in every single way. Okay, Georgia is their number 2 overall behind Clemson. It is clearly their number 1. Their so-called rivalries with Florida and Tennessee, obviously they've picked up, but they played Georgia since the 60s and 50s, and I mean they played them forever. So that is a really important game for the Carolina people because Georgia played them in the 70s and the 80s, home and away. So I think they would do all they can to keep that game. I would be sad to see that game go, just straight up. It would be disappointing. But again, Georgia cannot play everybody, and that's really the challenge here. Is who would the 3 be? Would it be South Carolina or would it be Kentucky? I want you to tell me down below. Don't tell me I'm wrong about South Carolina and Georgia, because I'm not. If there's an expert in that particular thing, it's me. Okay, trust me. On that particular, game, it's me. But I don't know. I don't know if that game will survive the future of the SEC. Now, all that said, it's not like these games are going away. I mean, Georgia, let's say Carolina is not on Georgia's schedule. They would still play them twice every 4 years, okay? They just wouldn't play them every year. They would play them as often as they play Missouri or Oklahoma or Texas. So, I mean, we as a society sacrificed some things for the love of TV money, okay? And I'm not judging here, but we sacrificed LSU Georgia more often so we could get Missouri Georgia every single year. Nobody cares about Georgia Missouri. Nobody. Nobody in Missouri cares. No, I can assure you no one in Athens cares. No one cares. The game does not get clicks, for lack of a better term. It's never been over I think a 3 million viewership game. It's a game that literally does not ever matter. Georgia wins, and then we move on, right? That's basically what that game is. Georgia, South Carolina in the past has had 8 million viewer game, an 8 million viewer game. So that you'd really be taking away part of South Carolina's stuff if you ended that game. And you could not easily replace it. You could not easily replace it because from a lot of the things, that you hear from behind the scenes, Carolina, if they didn't keep Georgia, they'd keep Florida and they'd keep Tennessee. That doesn't turn them on like the Georgia game. It just doesn't. I mean, the Georgia-Carolina game is a big game for them every single year, and it is a, sort of certain sellout. They have 2 certain sellouts in Columbia every single year. One is Clemson, one is Georgia. Florida, they don't travel. Tennessee, lately, okay, but it doesn't stand the test of time. So I think if you're the league, you've taken the money, you've taken OU, you've taken Texas, and there comes sacrifice with that. Georgia has done their fair share of sacrificing. They have not stood in the way of playing at Auburn twice in a row. They have not stood in the way of flip-flopping Auburn, Tennessee. They've asked for things and they've gotten them. But there's stuff, the one thing when I talk to decision makers in the league, whether they're in Birmingham, they're in Athens, they're in Columbia, they're in wherever, okay, is that what's driven home at the end of the day is this is a 16-member group. No one can just say, we want this and this is what it's going to be. Ole Miss had to sacrifice in 13 and 12, if I'm not mistaken. So they took the bullet, and so did Georgia in that situation. But it turned out, I mean, at the end of the day, you do it because you're in the league together. There are no conspiracies, y'all. I know it's fun to talk like that. It's just not based in reality. So Carolina is going to ask to protect a game. They're probably going to ask to protect Georgia. Unless they know for sure they're not getting Georgia, they're going to ask to protect Georgia. But Georgia will have already protected Florida, and the Gators will have protected Georgia. After that, they may give you one more protection, and that would be Georgia Auburn for both the Georgia for Auburn for Georgia. After that, there's literally no telling. I mean, I would be furious, but the league could stick Georgia with Missouri, and there's just really not a lot you could say. You just be mad about it. But I think that's kind of where we're at with this thing. For Carolina, it's tricky. I don't know if you're Kentucky what you ask for, because I mean, if I were them, I would ask for Vanderbilt and Tennessee. I think they should get at least one of those two, but I don't know that they will. And it's it is, the league has matured. These old games that have been played for a long, long time, if they're not been played for like 80 years, the likelihood of them getting saved is not as high as the other ones. So just keep that in mind. But my suspicion is, to wrap it, Georgia goes with the Gators, Auburn, and probably Kentucky, but we'll just see.